Ladies and gentlemen, NZXT have done it again. I mean, quite literally. I don't really know why, but here we are. We have a brand new case that replaces the old H5 Flow. They've come up with a really catchy new name for this. This is called the H5 Flow 2024, and there's actually quite a few changes on this. I mean, at first glance, it's still a white or black box, depending on, of course, on the color that you go for, but there's a few changes that I really like about this, and then a few things that I think are perhaps a little bit questionable. But obviously, the only way to find out whether this is a good case and one that you should actually be buying yourself is to do a full build. So that's what we're going to do, a pretty epic all-white gaming PC build, but we are going to be focusing on the H5 Flow to see whether this is a case you should be buying, or ultimately it's one you should be leaving on the shelf. I mean, you're probably buying this online, so it's come from a warehouse. Do they have shelves in warehouses? I don't know where cases come from, but let's find out absolutely everything you need to know right after a short word from this video sponsor. Intel Gamer Days is back for 2024, and there are some insane deals to be had on the latest gaming gear. This MSI sold laptop is now available up to £350 off the RRP, and comes packing the mighty Intel Core i7 14700HX processor for powerful gaming performance. But that's far from all. There are so many deals across a huge range of devices that now is the perfect time to get game ready for the colder months. You can even get a free copy of Assassin's Creed Shadows with a qualifying purchase, which will save you even more. So why not level up your gaming experience today? Check out Intel Gamer Days with the link down below. Okay then, the H5 Flow. What exactly is it and what do you need to know? Well, essentially this is, I don't want to say entry level, this is what I would describe as the best place really to start a gaming PC journey. It's not going to be the most expensive case out there, but it's certainly not going to be the cheapest either. So with that, you get a case that's actually very well put together, is solid, doesn't feel cheap, and yeah, it's nice to have obviously a case that is going to hopefully be as good quality as the rest of your components and ultimately give you a PC that you can be proud of. And because this is the H5, it's a little bit smaller, a little bit cheaper than obviously the H5 and the H9. I'll start by saying that the price difference between the H5 and the H7 isn't actually crazy, and it will change all of the time because this has almost got the same problem at the time of filming that the new AMD 9000 chips have, which you might be a bit confused by. But by that, I mean this comes in at the exact same RRP as the older case, which was $95 for the base version, or this RGB one is about $120. But you can buy the old cases way cheaper than that. I mean, you can buy the H5 for like 65, 70 pounds-ish at the time of filming. I imagine that they will phase the old one out, so they're not going to be selling both at the same time, because that would be very confusing. So if you do want to grab yourself a bargain and you like the old version, go for that. The main change, actually, that you've probably already noticed is all about airflow, really, because the H5 had this really cool nifty fan at the front, and it was angled to actually blow towards the GPU, and that was something we haven't really seen many other cases do. I mean, I've tested one from Cougar that was about £180. It did do the same thing, but otherwise not that many cases went down that route. I imagine it's a little bit more expensive to produce, you need more special tooling, whereas if you keep all the lines straight, that's probably easier to produce. What they've done is to get rid of that entirely, as you can see, but they have improved the airflow by actually having this mesh all the way down the side, but then also it goes a little bit on the underneath. So this is angled, and this is going to allow your GPU to breathe regardless of whether you have that fan populated down the bottom, or if you do want to put two extra fans here on the top of the bottom shelf, you can do that as well, and that's still going to allow those fans to actually breathe, because obviously one of the problems with putting fans here is that you usually have a power supply there that obviously blocks most of it off, but that will at least allow you to get a little bit more airflow through a gap that would otherwise be pretty restrictive. But moving around to the front, and I am going to have a little bit of a moan here because this kind of suffers from the same issue that the new H7 has, and I've worked out why. So they've tried to be clever, and I guess this is a good thing if it brings the cost down. I don't really know, I'm not sure, we'll have to test longevity with this, but essentially the dust filters are gone and you now just have a single mesh panel, and it's a little bit finer, and the idea is that you're still going to get great airflow, but it's also going to catch a little bit of dust, and obviously cleaning it, still not really a problem, you just take it off, wipe it, fine. But this then means that the whole thing is a little bit more transparent than it was before, which means that these 140 fan holes are a lot more visible than they otherwise would be. So if I pop this back on, I don't know if you're going to agree with me or not, but I don't like the fact that you can see the tram lines for the 140 fans, and I just think that kind of ruins the really clean aesthetic, because to me, it's just far too obvious. I mean, it's not as obvious as it was on the H7, and I think if you went for the black version, it would probably be even less obvious, but otherwise, I quite like the front. So if this doesn't bother you, great, fantastic. And the fact that you have three 120s included as this standard block, I think is a good idea. It keeps the cost down, and $120, even at RRP, I think for a case like this is pretty solid, especially bear in mind you don't have to swap any of the fans out. Maybe this one at the back if you wanted additional RGB, but probably not necessary, right? I think you're getting quite a lot for your money. You can put a 360 rad here at the front, which is cool. At the top, you can put a 240, or if you're specifically using low profile RAM, you can put a 280, and obviously that would give you better cooling. But in a case like this, I imagine a lot of people are going to be using air coolers anyway, but it's nice to have a little bit of flexibility. Now, getting into the back is some thumb screws. The whole thing comes off. Not the most premium side panel in the world, but still like decently thick. No issues with that. I don't think you're going to worry about it feeling like a piece of paper or anything like that. But anyway, let's have a look what we have, shall we? Well, actually, so far, looks pretty decent. Essentially, what I'm looking for is a load of straps and a load of natural cable management, because when you're doing a PC build, especially if you haven't really done one before, it's very easy just to put all of the cables through and then do it all at the end. But a case that kind of encourages you to like loop things over here, strap it down, will give your average Joe a better result at the end. And it does look as if there's quite a few tie down points as well if you do want to use cable ties and things. But yes, a nice amount of channels and things. All of our cables are white, which is quite a nice touch. You'd be surprised how many cases don't actually do this, but look, here we have our USB Type-C, USB 3, front panel, which is a single connector, which is good, fans, and then we do have HD audio that sadly does have a little bit of ketchup and mustard on the end. A little bit annoying, but a little bit of white electrical tape would cover that up. Now, obviously, because this is a smaller chassis, don't expect to fill this with loads of larger size hard drives and things. This is definitely for someone that has one hard drive, because that's all that is supported. And essentially you'll mount that to the top. If you have 2.5 inch SSDs, or I don't know, hubs or things you just want to stick down the bottom, then obviously you can put those in there, but that removes really easily, just slides in and has a single thumb screw. Power supply obviously goes down the bottom. Looks like there's loads of room here, even if you do want to use a radiator or something like that. I will say that there aren't any RGB hubs or anything fitted as standard. The idea really is now that you sync it all with your motherboard, and I guess they want you to buy an NZXT motherboard, and then your ecosystem would work a whole lot more seamlessly. That is a little bit of a disappointment, because I've seen some £60 cases that have addressable RGB hubs, so it would have been good to have that. But they will sell you one if you do want to go down the full USB control route with their RGB and fan controller option, but as I say, that is not standard even on this Flow version. Now, the last thing before we press on is just to say that this case is essentially the same size as the old Flow that it does replace, but you can now actually fit a larger graphics card in here. Pretty much everything has a slightly larger amount of support, which is quite nice, especially bear in mind, as I say, the footprint's essentially the same. It is just slightly longer, but when it's on your desk, it's not going to make any difference whatsoever. I will do a quick size comparison for you though, because here we have the A3, which is from Lee & Lee. So this is a micro ATX case, and as you can see, is actually essentially the same size, just slightly taller, which is good, because a lot of cases will be unnecessarily large for their size, but actually both of those are pretty much as small as you can get for a no compromise ATX or MATX rig. I'm sure this is really entertaining watching a blank wall, but there we are. And then I also want to do a comparison with a different full-size ATX case. So this is the TD Mesh V2 from Cooler Master, and this is also ATX, but as you can see, that one is mainly just a little bit taller. So if you did want to go for, well, radiators and things at the top, then this is probably going to be easier because you've got that little bit extra height above the motherboard. But it depends entirely what you're going to do, and if you are going to save money, then obviously I would recommend going for an air cooler anyway, as long as you're buying a CPU that doesn't require proper heavy duty cooling. But let's open up our goodie bag now, shall we? What's inside? Well, as you'd expect, a whole bunch of screws, and NZXT didn't get the memo and are still just putting the names of the screw rather than actually just putting on the bag what they're for. I mean, they've managed to put H5 Flow series on the bottom of this, but they haven't just written motherboard and SSD on the bags like they should. Why aren't you doing this? Oh, and they've also given you the world's smallest cable ties. Why would you do that? I've seen some novel ones in my time, including like ridiculously big, but that is very, very pointless, isn't it? That's barely gonna fit our ATX cable. Really, NZXT? That's it, don't buy the case.
Cable tie's too small.
But anyway, enough chit chat. It's now time to actually get our build started. And we're going for a white motherboard here. This is X670E. We've discussed this many times on the channel before. I would recommend going for B650E, to be honest, or maybe look at the brand new 800 series from AMD, though at the time of filming, that's not actually released yet. Those do have some cool new features, whereas X670E, there's not really that much for a gamer to get excited about, to be honest. To be fair though, this one from ASRock does tick a lot of boxes, mainly because it's not the most expensive X670 motherboard out there, and because it fuses black and white, I find it goes really well with pretty much any case, rather than like just if you're trying to do an all-white build. If you have any elements of black in this kind of like helps disguise it, tie it in. The CPU we're going for is pretty much the best all-round gaming chip. This obviously is the Ryzen 7 7800X3D, and there is actually an update coming for Windows that you can get now, I believe. It's an optional one that should give you roughly 10% better performance if you're CPU limited with the new Ryzen chips, which is pretty cool. Not just the 9000 series, the 7000 as well, but this is something that we'll be testing. But anyway, I digress. Let's whack this into position. We'll then pick up our memory, and obviously we're going for 32 gig. This is pretty much the sweet spot for Ryzen, 6000 megahertz CL30. This is a kit from Team Group that actually has Expo and XMP profiles baked on it, which is pretty cool. Drop our RAM into position. Always get that satisfying click. Sometimes it kind of dampens on the box and it's really quite sad, but yeah, you see like that. But that was okay. I'll give that a 5 out of 10. Obviously, as you'd expect, we're also going for a PCIe SSD. This is the Rocket 4 Plus-G. Not entirely sure this one is worth the extra money. It depends on the price of checkout, obviously, but they've got the G for gaming. But the performance on these drives are pretty good, but same as always, just buy the best drive that you can that's on sale. But otherwise, just drop that down into position and then secure down. And then, of course, we're now ready to move on to our cooler. And look what Amazon have done to my box. They've completely ruined this. They could have put it in some external packaging, but no. They put the label bloody on the front of it. Don't they know I make these videos? I mean, I guess not. I could show you the back side of the box, but that's not really quite as attractive. But anyway, cooler, we're actually going for something a little bit different here because this is the Freezer 36 ARGB. And the main reason actually for this is because trying to keep the cost of the build down, but also I want to test the cooling of this case. And if we just like got a 360 Red or something, it doesn't really tell us that much. I want to know if there's enough airflow for a cheaper cooler to work. And you can actually find this on a good day for around about like £25 or something. But even on a bad day, £40 for this is pretty good, and it comes in a few different flavors. You can get it in like an all white or all black, or the RGB version that we're going for here. I will briefly show you how to install it though. Just remove the default AM5 mounting hardware, plastic post down on top, black bars secured into position, little squeeze of thermal compound, peel removed, and then cooler placed on top. Then realize you put the brackets on upside down. But once you have got that rectified, obviously screw it down into position, then get the fans, make sure they're actually blowing out of your chassis. And then with what has to be the best mechanism I've actually seen for CPU coolers, these literally just push into position, cables facing downwards obviously, give that a push, and then get it all connected to your motherboard. Once you've done that, we can now get this motherboard installed. And I imagine this will be as straightforward as pretty much any other modern day build, because of course the IO shield is on the back. Should just drop down into position. There is a catch to actually hold everything into place. It does look as if cable management is going to be a lot easier at the top where you've got this bar. I mean, I will plop this upright so you can actually see. Is that catch strong enough to stop the motherboard falling? Yes, but I wouldn't recommend doing this. Where you've got this like cable management bar at the top, that's all very well for like the thick cables at the top. Then if you do have a load of things down the bottom, obviously that might get a little bit more tricky and complicated, but for most builds, I think it'll be fine. And I'll tell you what, actually, normally I'll cut this bit out because it's boring, but as this is a case review, I do want to say, because you don't have that much clearance at the top, actually getting all of your screws and things at the top is going to be more tricky. I basically can't really do it with this cooler in place. And this is before we put a radiator at the top. So if you are going to put a 240 at the top, do remember that space is going to be very limited. Highly recommend that you use like a modular power supply and have your cables plugged in first. Anything that can go at the top, please do this before you put your radiator in, because there's just not that much room here. But hey, we got there in the end, didn't we? And otherwise, so far so good really. And yes, you can definitely see the appeal of going for like an all-white build if you do go for the white color scheme. I think their attention to the details so far has been pretty good. It's just a smaller size chassis that is obviously going to lead to small size chassis issues really. No biggie there. But let's turn this round and actually get our power supply installed now, shall we? And NZXT did of course supply this one along with the case. This is a new one. This is their C850 Gold. We're going for a 4080 Super, so this is pretty much the sweet spot. But this also comes with white cables, which is nice. It's 80 plus gold, comes with an ATX 3.1 connection, and then a 10-year warranty, which is pretty decent. But let's have a look at our white cables. Well, cable mods, they are not, but I mean more than sufficient and definitely going to look better better than your standard affair, despite the fact that the sleeving is still a little bit more on the basic side. I mean, to be fair, that's definitely very nitpicky. The most important thing is probably that this PCI Gen 5 cable, the ATX 3.1, is actually a 600 watt cable. So you can use this with a 4090 and hopefully future NVIDIA graphics cards with no hassle at all. Oh, this one actually looks quite big. I mean, it's just slightly longer, I think, than your standard one. But I mean, if you go for a really high-end power supply, they'd be even bigger than this. So no issues whatsoever. You've got the silver bar, that's quite nice. Even smells good too. And then you have all of your modular connections. So obviously you don't have to use the connections that you don't need, which will give you a tidier and easier rig to build and construct. I mean, actually, before we put this in, let's do the proper acid test, which is gonna be, can you get your HD audio plugged in and then still get the power supply in without having to take it out? Because this happens on loads of cases and it's really annoying. So yeah, look, loads of room. Okay, now this does actually make sense, because remember earlier in the video when I alluded to the fact that if you do put a power supply down here at the bottom, then obviously it stops the airflow, but they've actually shifted the power supply a lot to the left-hand side, which means, I'll try and show you this as best as I can, which means you've actually got loads of ventilation down here. So this actually now kind of makes sense. Originally I was thinking, well, why would you get rid of that fan at the front when you're clearly gonna like hurt your airflow? But no, actually, because you've now got loads of ventilation down here, if you did want to populate fans, then this is gonna give proper air to your GPU. So all right, NZXT, that is really clever. I like that. I like it a lot. Oh, right, okay. I was singing their praise. I understand now why more case manufacturers don't do that. How did I miss this initially? When you have a look at this case, one of the reasons that it's shorter is because it doesn't have feet, so it sits directly on the ground. And if it's sitting directly on the ground, what does that mean? It means that you don't get airflow. So they've actually made this bit completely solid at the back, and your power supply, unlike most cases, now needs to go up. And the way that they've actually done this is to essentially stop you from being able to screw it in if you put it upside down. Honestly, hand to heart, I would have missed that, and that would have obviously been quite bad. So they want you to put your power supply here and then obviously exhaust at the top and go into your GPU. Not sure if that's a good idea or not. I don't think it's going to make masses of difference because you do have all of that extra ventilation, but I guess that is the trade-off of going down this route. And then because it's such a minimal rig, there's actually only 3 power supply cables to plug in, our main PSU, CPU, and then that Gen 5 cable. So cable management is going to be as easy as you could possibly get on this, but as I say, having all of those extra channels and things definitely helps, especially like this one to catch the CPU. It just means that you can sort of put pressure on one side, and it just makes everything a whole lot easier, right? But if you are going to stack this to the brim with water cooling and loads of power supply cables and RGB and all of that stuff, then yes, it might get a little bit more tricky, but I do like that you do have the tie down points and the hooks and things. So I think, I'm not saying this is as good as it gets, but it's definitely up there. And there's a nice amount of thickness actually this side as well. So if you are gonna stick hubs down, then there's plenty of room to do it without having to worry about the side panel not closing. Oh, how easy is this one gonna be? Not too bad, but this is still a more modest cooler. If you did have, as I say, a radiator or something bigger, there's no way you'd be able to get your hand in there. I mean, actually, is it going to be easier to take this top panel off and then go in that way? Yes. Fortunately, the ATX was a little bit easier to plug in, but where you have this bar here, it's borderline whether you can actually fold the cables down enough, because obviously you don't want to damage anything. The main thing is just making sure that it's not twisted when you actually route it through in the first place. Otherwise you end up with this like horrible bulbous thing here. But yes, actually that doesn't look too bad. I think the bar's quite clean. I think I'm personally still a bigger fan of grommets just because they're easier to work with. But when it does work like this, actually it looks quite good. With that out of the way then, I think there's just one last component to go, and that one of course being the graphics card, the best bit really of any gaming PC build. But I do want to quickly say, I completely forgot to show you the top earlier, so it's full mesh, but one of the downsides is that there's only one USB-A and one USB-C, which I think is a bit mean because most people would want 4 USB-A ports and no USB-Cs. I mean, okay, USB-C is useful for charging people's phones now, so I get that, but it shouldn't be at the expense of taking away one of the USB-As. I think this is actually probably one of the biggest usability issues with this case. I know it might not sound like a big deal to everyone, but as someone that frequently uses all of the ports on their front panel and wants more, not less, I think this would actually be an annoyance that I would notice most times that I use my gaming PC. But if it doesn't to you, great. But anyway, as I was trying to say, here we have our 4080 Super. This one is from Pallet, which I realized they don't actually sell in the US. They have like a different different brand or something. So I'll leave like a couple of links anyway to some similar cards. But for us Europeans, we get this, which is the Gaming Pro in white. I mean, Gigabyte Aero's always one of the popular ones that you can go for. You can get them at a decent price in sales, but otherwise they tend to be a little bit more expensive. But, oh, this is not the Gaming Pro in white. This is just the Gaming Pro. I mean, I'll tell you how I got confused. It's because I have the 4070 Ti in white, but this is now end of life, but I've started, so I'm gonna have to finish. So I will leave links to both a 4070 Ti Super in white and a 4080 Super in white down below. I'm glad this happened in a review video of the case, not a build, or we'd have a serious problem. Now, if you do want to go down the vertical GPU mount route, then you can do that, but you will have to buy that as an accessory. It doesn't come as standard, mainly because PCIe extension cables are very expensive, and obviously it would add a lot of cost. It's only really height that do that, but the panels. PCIe slot covers, that's what I'm looking for. They come out nice and easily, but it's not thumb screws, which is a little bit annoying, but I don't think it's gonna make any real difference to you. But this obviously just slides into position. And then I will also say that you don't get any like GPU sag brackets or anything as standard on this. Fair enough for the money, but if you wanted something like that, then maybe consider the Phanteks NV5, and I've discovered a flaw with that case because I've been moving it loads. That's got plastic feet, and actually picking that up when it's built is actually quite difficult, and you feel like you are either going to drop the whole thing or it breaks. So yes, plastic feet on case, bad, like big thing. Anyway, I digress. You can find that video in the top right corner of your screen if you want to learn more about my personal rig. But moving on to the final piece of the puzzle, it is just this cable here. So let's drop that down into position. It is also a shame that we don't have a cutout here, but I do understand because obviously that would then go into the fan mount. So if you were putting fans down there, it wouldn't work. So we can let that off a little bit, but maybe you could have done like a hybrid approach where you supported both. But yes, there it is, our completed rig. And I think that looks pretty nice, doesn't it? I mean, it's not the craziest thing. This probably would look slightly better with a vertical GPU mount. And I will say as well that you don't need to put fans down the bottom, but because you've got it so much more open for ventilation, it does mean that you'll see any of the cables that you've got down the bottom, especially if you're going for a black power supply, which most of them are. You'll see all of those cables in the basement. So they probably do want you to buy some extra fans and things. That's what they wanted me to do, but no, we're testing this raw, baby. That was really weird. But yes, like a F240 down the bottom would obviously work quite well, but any 120 fans really should be supported. So just whack those down and that will hide those cables. And if you did want to fit a radiator here as well, then obviously you can do that. There's plenty of room because the hard drive caddy actually does move left and right. So if you've got a really big power supply, then you can adjust for that, but you can't have like a massive power supply and a 360 rad at the same time. But to be honest with you, there's loads of room here, so it's not really something I would worry about. Cable management then, this was without doing anything overly special. I quite like this bar here actually to catch the CPU cable, but you're gonna have to make sure it's quite long because this was borderline stretching it, which I definitely wouldn't recommend. But do remember that we've barely used any cables here, so you know, your results might vary. I will also say as well that because all of these PSU cables are shifted over, it does give you a few like oddities, and a lot of the cables are kind of wanting to come this way, which can be a bit annoying. So you will have to manage those down. But again, if you've got a lot of cables, you might actually find that you are running into the bulging problem, not because you haven't got room to put them, but just because they're coming out of your power supply at a bit of a weird angle. But yes, so far so good. Shall we see if it works? Well, it seems to work. No RGB just yet, but that could be from the motherboard. But I mean, white builds, actually, I think they look great even with all of the RGB off. I mean, in my personal rig, I've barely got any enabled whatsoever. So certainly not boring, is it? But as we get our keyboard and mouse, hopefully we get something on screen. Oh, yes, yes! I was starting to get a bit worried then. This is one of the earlier X670E boards and I haven't flushed the BIOS, so yes. Looks like we're good. Whilst we're loading up our game, let's get our side panel back on and do the peel. And I can almost guarantee NZXT have not learnt their lesson and they've put this sticker under the peel, which makes no sense whatsoever. Are you ready for this? Why do they do this? It's so stupid. And then this leaves residue and it's horrible. I mean, okay, that's... See? No, there is residue. I hate it. Why do you do that? They do it just to annoy me, honestly. It's so frustrating. Anyway, let's jump into some games. And I have had this running now for around about 10 minutes. I mean, I would say that was deliberate, but I just lost my words a few times, so we've started again. And what you're seeing now is some Ratchet & Clank. I don't want this to be too heavily on the gameplay. Obviously, those are more for the builds. But around about 120 FPS at 1440p, very high, no ray tracing. DLSS balanced, very, very good. Not anything that you're gonna have to worry about really. It's a very flexible system. But the thing for me that's pretty exceptional are actually the temperatures, because you get plenty of fans included this as standard, but obviously if you were to take like full advantage of the fact that you have this mesh down the bottom, you could put those 2 extra fans below the GPU and get even better temperatures, but there's certainly no need to do so based on what we've got here. I mean, granted, if you're running like a really high CPU load, then obviously you are going to get higher temperatures on the CPU, but I mean 50 degrees on the GPU and then 53 on the CPU, pretty exceptional stuff. I mean, shout out to that Arctic cooler. The fact that you can get that for such an accessible price point is pretty ridiculous really, especially again, bearing in mind NZXT will sell you one that is, in my experience, not as good for, in some cases, almost double the price. So pretty cool stuff, right? I mean, obviously the 4070 Ti is not the absolute highest TDP card in the world, so if you are going to run this with like a 7900 XTX 4090, you are going to be generating more heat. I don't think you've got anything to worry about inside this actually, as long as you're being sensible and you are adding those extra fans down the bottom. If you are going for like the highest end rig, you're allowing for obviously like the tolerances in terms of actually fitting the components inside here. I think this is a great case, and it's definitely something that's worth getting excited about. I mean, I have now realized that our RGB is off on the front, but I think that's something I need to change in the motherboard. That's nothing to do with the case itself. But I mean, it does go to show that even with the RGB disabled, or if you went for the non-flow version, you're still getting something that's going to look great out the box. I mean, obviously you're not getting the exact same fans, but that's something you can swap out later if you want. So all round, pretty impressive. Here's your noise test. So you can definitely hear it, but nothing crazy. I mean, you could tune the fans a little bit more, but clearly the way we've got it at the moment works quite well. So yes, from a temperature and acoustic point of view, I think this thing is very exciting. It's really nice and easy to build as well because everything daisy chains together and you've not got too much. I mean, I must admit that NZXT's route of doing that like single block for the fans at the front is good. It makes everything easier. I like that, and it obviously makes it a little bit cheaper as well. But let's do one last test before we wrap this up, which is going to be to properly hammer our CPU with Cinebench. And again, I've got to be honest with you, I'm kind of astounded. Now, I know that this chip is relatively low TDP, so obviously it's not going to be like an unlocked i5 or i7. In fact, we're currently using about 63 watts, but this is Cinebench running at 100% load. And in terms of temperatures, we've only just hit 68 degrees and I've had this running for about 5 minutes or so. And the other thing as well is that the PC's barely making any noise. So if we did want to lower the temps, we could just turn the fans up more. So I'm very, very impressed. I mean, clearly this case does allow a lot of airflow in. I like the stock configuration and the way it's set up. And I do actually think that, I don't know if it's the first time I've recommended it, but certainly for the first time in a while, I would say skip the base version and do go for the RGB version because they give you everything that you need. Because it can just plug into addressable RGB headers, you don't need to worry about external hardware or like paying extra money or anything. Yes, it would probably look slightly better with another block of fans down here, but that's an accessory you can add at a later date. So all in all, I think this is potentially a little bit of a weird chassis. They've definitely done a few things that are a bit different, and I wouldn't say it's a slam dunk, but I think as long as you're happy with the fact that you've only got that one USB-A on the top, I don't see a reason not to recommend this. It was very easy to build in, it was very easy to cable manage. I guess it's more just a fact of, do you want to spend, at the time of launch anyway, loads more money for the new version when you can get the old version that's clearly in stock, ready to go at a significantly lower price. I mean, I'd probably still go for that H5 old version if it was me personally building my rig, just because you will be able to get it for potentially half the price at the time of filming. But within the coming weeks, months, when things change, I think this is going to be really easy to recommend to everyone. But if you like the look of it, go for it now. I think you're going to like it. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What do you make of the new H5 Flow? Do you agree with me that it's great, just a little bit weird? Or is there something specific you love about it or don't like so much? But anyway, we'd love to hear from you. Smash the like button if you've enjoyed this. Get yourself subscribed. And if you do want to check out current pricing on anything that was featured in this video, you can find it listed down below with our affiliate links. And while you're down there, why not bag yourself a bargain with Intel Gamer Days? This limited time sale brings you the best of Intel all in one place, with huge discounts on a range of devices packing the latest Intel Core mobile processors. Not only do you get great gaming performance, but also modern features like super fast Wi-Fi 7, DDR5 memory, Thunderbolt 5, and a whopping 24 cores of CPU horsepower. There are masses of deals to be had, but hurry, they won't last long. So grab them while you can, with the link down below. Thank you guys so much for checking out this video. If you do want to check out the full build with the larger H7 2024, you can find that in the top right corner of your screen. But otherwise, we'll see you in the next one.